Started.
Great, it's 8 o'clock. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the March 4th, 2026 meeting of the Millburn Township Charter Study Commission, which is called to order. In accordance with Section 5 of the Open Public Act, Meetings Act, Chapter 231, Public Laws 1975, be advised that notice of this meeting was made by posting on the bulletin board in Town Hall and forwarding to the officially designated newspapers. This meeting would take place at the Ballard Center at 8 o'clock on Wednesday, March 4th, 2026. Meeting details and the draft agenda have been posted. I'd like everyone to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Maureen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Corey. I would now like to have a roll call. Please note if you're present, Dr. Khan.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Dr. Cummings here, Ms. Parker Lund,
Here.
Mr. Kenna,
Yes.
Mr. Drucker.
Here.
I note that we also have Council Suzanne Sabasco, Team Mention Collins in attendance, and also Mayor Dr. Christopher Tamburo of Verona on our Zoom.
Thank you. The record will show we have a quorum for this meeting. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Did everyone have a chance to read the minutes? May I have a motion to approve the February 25, 2026 meeting minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Good. All in favor?
Aye.
Right. Reports. Are there any commissioners with reports since our last meeting?
I can give a report.
Okay, thank you.
So Chinook and I have been proceeding with our interviews of various townships that are municipalities that are similar to ours, but also different, similar in sense of size of residents, downtown, features like that, but also different in the sense that some of them are partisan, some of them are not partisan, some of them have elected mayors, some have non-elected mayors, and the intent of our discussions is to find out what sort of works for them, what doesn't work for them, so that when we're considering potential either staying with what we are, potential changes, what from similar features, what might work and not. So we have had discussions with Red Bank, which is the most recent town to do a charter study like ours. We had a discussion with Madison this week. We've also reached out to Ridgewood and South Orange. Unfortunately, we haven't heard back from them. We have tried twice. So we're going to try a different method. And tonight we're going to be hearing from Verona. And I think the conversations have been interesting. But both of Red Bank and Madison were very different. Red Bank talked a lot about their study and why they had their study, what's changed, what's working now with the change. Madison's been pretty stable for a while. They actually did do a charter study in the 70s, which is similar to when Millburn did it. It wasn't uncommon at the time because that's sort of when the law changed, which allowed for these charter committees. But they decided at that time, similar to Millburn, not to make a change. And so we had a good discussion. It was interesting that the discussion, the perspective, sort of not ours, but the mayor of Madison, his perspective on certain things actually changed as our conversation was happening, based on having a perspective of the back and forth between us and what we see and what he's experienced. It's interesting is, if you experience one thing and that's sort of what your norm is and there hasn't been issues with it, then nothing trips in your mind. But if you're experiencing something and then, we discuss sort of similar issues that we're experiencing in our town and how that has caused issues. He's like, I didn't think of it that way. We haven't had an issue because of that, but I didn't think of it definitely could influence or that. And so it was a good back and forth. I thought it was very productive, and obviously we will include that as part of our report and results. And so I look forward to continuing those conversations with other towns so that it can inform our decision.
Thank you, Corey. I would like to report on a research visit Dr. Khan and I made to Verona on Monday. We visited the Verona Public Library and their municipal clerk's office to locate 1986 Charter Study Commission report. The clerk's office did not have a copy on file. The library did not have a standalone copy either, but we discovered that the report was published in full in the local newspapers at the time, which the library has digitalized.
You didn't go on microfiche?
Let me tell you.
Yeah.
Do they still have
Let me
microfiche?
tell you something. We did big time digging. Let me continue.
Okay, sorry.
We transcribed the full text from those clippings, and that document will be posted to the commissioner's website shortly. We also located the original ballot question and election results. The charter change to move away from the borough form of government to a council manager form was approved by Verona voters in 1986 by a margin of 2,480 to 1,327, roughly 2-to-1 vote. The first reorganization election under the new form drew 8 candidates for 5 seats. We are looking forward tonight to interview Mayor Tamburo as the next step in that research. Are there any other commissioner reports?
I have a small report.
Okay.
I don't know if it qualifies as a report per se, but more of a shout out. I would really like to thank the Short Hills Association. I spoke with Tom Hildner, who said that we are able to use their interview with Mr. Pfeiffer. So it'll be a very useful piece of information to add to our tools and our list of things that viewers can log on and look at it. I highly encourage everyone to look at that interview. It was incredibly well done, great questions, and I think it'll help guide people as they're watching what we're doing. And I do encourage, if all of us haven't watched it all the way through, to watch it. And perhaps if you have watched it, watch it again, because I think it's got a lot of really important things for us to consider to help inform our future, thing.
Thank you.
Oh, and one more thing, sorry, there's part 2. I also spoke with Mr. McDonald, as did Jerry earlier today, regarding exploring what we don't know. Because as somebody else said to me, we don't know what we don't know, and we don't want to make recommendations on things that could cause issues in the future. So in order to explore, if we're actually exploring making a recommendation to go from 5 to 7, we should really not just have you focus on talking to people how they feel as TC members, but find a BA, a business administrator, who has been working with a group of 7, because there was a concern perhaps from someone saying, well, gosh, that's 2 more personalities, that's 2 more people I have to talk to or train, and now more people have to worry about in town hall that there's another 2 bodies to get them up to speed. So Alex said he would love to sit down with us, with you and I, and meet with the other business administrator to ask the questions that perhaps you and I don't have the wherewithal for the day-to-day business and how it affects the town. So I'm grateful to Alex McDonald for lending his time once again.
And I'd just like to add on to that, Dr. Khan and Joanna Parker-Lenz have interviewed Alex McDonald twice so far and everything. So this will be a 3rd time, and
Continued, yeah.
we're very grateful for him to give us his time. All right.
I have one small thing as
okay.
well. So there has been discussion recently in terms of number of candidates that run in partisan versus nonpartisan elections. So I started doing an analysis of different towns with councils and mayors. Mayors of obviously 1 seat, but councils might have 2 or 3 seats up at a time. How many people ran for those elections, comparing a partisan versus nonpartisan, and just collecting all of that data and just having it in
That's
one
great
place so we
data.
can-
Yeah, that's great data for us to have and for the public to have. So that's smart. Thank you.
So I'm working on compiling that.
Anyone else? We're good?
Yeah.
All right. Public comment. To speak during the public comment period, please follow these instructions. Ensure your Zoom display name shows your first and last name. Click the raised hand button. You will be called upon in order and promoted to panelists. Please turn on your video when called to speak. Clearly state your full name and whether you are a Milburn resident or a business owner. To facilitate an orderly meeting and permit all to be heard, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. a reminder that the public comment period is an opportunity for residents to share their views with the commission. Commissioners will not respond to questions or engage in dialogue during your speaking time, but will carefully consider all comments. At the end of the public comment period, questions and discussion may be addressed at the chair's discretion. Is there anyone that would like to speak now, or we're gonna have another public question and answer period at the end? Anyone on Zoom?
If anyone on Zoom wishes to speak, you may raise your hand now. No one wishes to be heard.
Okay, good. I now close the first public comment period. Are there any comments from the commissioners regarding comments made by the public? Since there wasn't any, let's continue on. Old business interviews. Tonight, we have the distinct pleasure of interviewing the current mayor of the Township of Verona, Dr. Christopher Tamburro. Dr. Burrow was first elected to the Verona Township Council in 2021 and re-elected in 2025. He has served as mayor since 2023. He began his public service for the Township of Verona as a member of the local emergency medical service and deputy coordinator of the Township Office of Emergency Management. Chris is a teacher of political science, economics, and law at Verona High School. He is additionally an adjunct professor in the Doctor of Philosophy and Education programs at Cornell University, instructing classes in educational policy, legal issues, and contract negotiation. Chris serves as a consultant for labor unions, focusing on contract negotiations and enforcement, mediation, arbitration, public policy, budgeting, and fiduciary matters. Without further ado, let's start asking Dr. Tamburro questions. Doctor, could I just call you Chris?
Yes, that works for me. Very simple.
Good. My name is Chris also. It's easier for me. So, oh yeah. I got another sheet here. So, Chris, can you briefly describe Verona's current form of government? Who holds the levers of legislative and executive power? What is the council size? How does elections work, partisan or nonpartisan, term lengths, frequency, and how long has Verona operated under this structure? And if you want me to go back, I'll to that question, I will.
No, you're all right. Thank you. First off, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Don't often get to reflect necessarily on our system of government because that's just what it is. I do have a recommendation before I answer your question because I'm a politician and I can't just answer the question you asked. When you're talking about just talking to township administrators, the recent, not the current, the immediately prior township administrator of Verona is a gentleman by the name of Joseph Diarco. Mr. Diarco had been a township administrator for 55 years in some capacity or another. And he has worked in borough form of government as a manager, as an administrator, a township committee form of government. And he is one of the most distinguished. He's retired for like the 19th time now. But he is a wealth of knowledge related to New Jersey municipal government operations. And if you would like to get in contact with him, I heard you talking about administrators who I'm sure would help you. His wife is the borough clerk of Bloomfield as well. So they're a very government-oriented family, but he's a phenomenal resource, and we were very lucky to have him for 3 years to fill a big gap that we needed filled. As far as Verona, we operate under the Faulkner Act council manager form of government. I think you had prefaced before that this was decided in a referendum back in 1986. And we are nonpartisan. Traditionally, when I ran in 2021, our elections were held in May. We did the May nonpartisan election. And then we did that in 2023 as well. Our elections are every 2 years. In one of the 2-year cycles, 3 members of the township council are up for election. And in the other 2-year cycle, 2 seats are up. We are nonpartisan and happy about that, and I'm sure we'll get into that later. And our term lengths are 4 years. So we fit into that framework pretty well. And that's what we did. So we did move the elections. I'm sure you'll ask me about this, from May to November. We very much liked our May nonpartisan elections. And when I say we, I mean, it's the royal we, I suppose. But what was happening is more municipalities started moving away from the May municipal. So South Orange, for example, moved away from the May municipal election. The cost of the May municipal is actually borne by the municipalities and not by the county. So the county has to divide its static costs among all the participating municipalities. So we started to see the writing on the wall that running one election was costing us about $75,000. And we did not have easy access to things like early voting, because that would expand the cost pretty significantly. And there was some discussion, and I'm sure we'll get into that later, but this was the first November election that we had with a record voter turnout for many reasons. And so we've just experienced a pretty significant shift in the way we conduct our elections as well. So it's an exciting time for Verona government in that way.
Thank you. So you actually answered question number 2 I had, but part B of question 2 is how did it impact governance moving from May to November?
I think it's a great question, and it's one that I think I'm still don't have enough data to necessarily answer, because it's only been a few months in that system. But I can share some thoughts. The first has allowed us to use budgeted money for other things, and in the current tax cap environment, that was very important. As far as governance goes, it hasn't really affected, I think, our operations as a municipality. One interesting thing that we had to do in the short run was to actually extend our own terms, which was a very interesting experience, in that we by ordinance, we were able to extend our own terms for 6 months in order to move the election. So that was interesting. It was something that we were all kind of working around. One other.
So you didn't have a gap, right?
So no, we did not create a gap.
Okay.
Instead of doing a referendum on this matter, the council actually passed an ordinance. We were allowed to do that. You can only do it once every 10 years. So to change your election from May to November. So we cannot make a change for 10 more years after this point. So we opted to, and I think from discussions that a lot of us had, it was clear that not all of the public, but enough of the public certainly wanted to move the elections to November. You have things like ballot fatigue, election fatigue, that were causing that. And a lot of people moving into Verona, as I'm sure you're seeing in the Millburn Short Hills area, are coming from Manhattan, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, places like that. And this idea of a May municipal election was very alien to a lot of people. And our voter turnout was not as high as I would like it to be, right? And it creates a very interesting question when you have a May municipal of voter mandate, because you have the electoral results of the individuals who participate in the election, but when that's not even a majority of the town participating in the election, that is an interesting question. So we moved the elections to November and had very, very high voter turnout. And I can't give the exact number, but it was somewhere around 70%, even if a little higher.
70% of the folks in
Of the registered voters. Yeah, it was
Wow.
significant. It's huge. It was a lot clearer that there was an electoral mandate for the individuals who won the election. So that is a helpful form as well. We had instead of having, 1,800 votes decide an election or 1,500 votes decide an election, it was your top voter getters were close to 4,000 votes in a town of about 15,000 residents, about 13,000 registered voters. So you actually had, a pretty significant statement from the public in that way as far as who they wanted in office, which was helpful, I think, in a lot of ways. Especially in Verona, when we're going through a lot of very significant questions right now, like the construction of a public safety complex, um, uh, completely revitalizing a lot of our public water and sewer infrastructure, which creates a rate paying affordable housing, as you guys are dealing with as well, and many other pretty hot topic items, some recreation, facility upgrades. And it was helpful to know from the public that there was support to continue the work that we had started. So that was really important to know as well. So I think probably the best way that it's changed governance is that we knew what we were doing was what the public wanted us to do.
Gotcha.
At least for the most part. Not all the
Uh-huh.
public is knocking on doors. The public is not saying we agree with everything you're doing, but what I was hearing from a lot of the public, at least the ones that were receptive of my knocking on the door, not everybody was, of course, but was that we think you're generally the town is heading in the right direction. And that was really important to see. So that was the biggest item, and it gave us this mandate to move forward on a lot of very complex issues that some governing bodies might be a little more concerned about approaching because of that reason. So, and that's another nice reason about having elections every 2 years versus every year is it allows the council to work for 2 years or or a year and 6 months before election cycle comes in, and really allows you to work together as a team and tackle a lot of these issues without things going on hold because of elections um, or changes in the landscape, creating some issues that make decisions more difficult to make. So that's positive in that way.
Thanks, Chris. Let me go back to question one. You answered most of it, but this one, who holds the levers of legislature and executive power?
So in Verona, under the council manager form of government, the township council is purely a legislative body. We do not hold executive authority. The township manager is both the chief executive officer and chief administrative officer of the government under the Faulkner Act. So this differs from a lot of the more traditional borough form of government, which is somewhat unique to the state of New Jersey, and even the township committee form of government, as I'm sure you're aware. But the township manager is the CEO and chief administrative officer. There are, by statute, some tasks that the mayor still has to perform that are not shared by the rest of the council. So certain appointments, so the mayor appoints the environmental commission. However, the township manager appoints the shade tree commission by state law, by ordinance. But our township manager takes recommendations from the council on those appointments. The mayor also appoints the alternates to the zoning board of adjustment as well, but not the rest of the zoning board members. And the mayor designates a chair of the environmental commission. I'm just trying to see if there's anybody else in there. The only appointment, so the council appoints all of the rest of the committees. The council appoints the township manager. The council appoints the township attorney by virtue of having to approve a professional services agreement, but really by naming the individual, the township council, the attorney council with an S versus a C. And the council appoints the municipal clerk, though our municipal clerk is tenured, so that has not been something the council has had to address. We also have some say in an appointment of a chief financial officer, but it's still a little there's some questions we still need to answer on that, but in Verona, we were all on the same page, the manager and the council, on appointing a new CFO, so it wasn't an issue. But because the CFO holds some statutory authority that reports directly to the council, that's there. The mayor also separately is performs weddings and traditional things like that, has proclamation power, and signs official documents. So I have to sign all the bonds and all of those items. And I have to execute various things from the state. So even though the township manager has some of that authority, the state still recognizes the mayor as having to attest to a lot of the state documents as well.
Thank you.
And just to confirm, the mayor is elected by the council or by the voters directly?
The mayor is elected by the council. It is technically an election, though a lot of folks use the term appointment, which isn't technically the correct term. It's not an appointment, but because you are electing from among your mayors, but we use them interchangeably.
Great.
Okay. Verona's council members serve 4-year staggered terms with elections every 2 years. Some of our phase 1 respondents felt that 4-year terms are too long, that annual elections provide better accountability and keep elected officials closer to their constituents. Others argue that the longer terms with staggered elections strike the right balance between continuity and accountability. How has that structure worked in Verona in practice? Does the 2-year election cycle provide enough continuity? And do 4-year terms feel appropriate or too long, Chris?
That's a fantastic question. I think the 4-year term is just right. You're in that Goldilocks kind of situation with the 4 years, and I'll offer why. One of the beauties of our system of government is that, as I said before, that we only have elections every other year, which allows the council to really work together on setting and achieving goals during that time and helping to direct the township administration and deal with capital outlay and things like that. So it allows some time. When you think about it, if you have an election every year, and you elect somebody new, your time where you're really able to govern without an election happening is from January to about March or April, if you're partisan, because then you start to get into the primary season and into the general election season. And unfortunately, a trend that happens, at least among a lot of elected officials, is opinions sometimes develop, we'll use that word, change during election cycles. So you might have been on one phase, and then all of a sudden you have a group of voters or supporters that are asking for one particular thing, and some elected officials tend to it might make decisions or change in that direction. So us having the 2-year terms and not having primaries because we're a nonpartisan town moves our election cycle only to a few months, which is great in that you don't have that fatigue from too many elections, like a primary and a general election. You have the right amount of time to focus on municipal issues, but you're also really able to govern in that year as well. So that's very important in my opinion, in that way. If I understand the desire for 3-year terms, and I can tell you one of the consequences, or having an election every year or 3-year terms, our school board has 3-year terms, and you always have somebody running. And what has actually happened is we have fewer candidates running for school board because you have so many frequent elections, and a lot of people are like, hey, I don't want to run every 3 years, right? Because running for office is very time consuming. And when you're looking for good people in a municipality, you really want to draw the individuals who are going to put the time and effort into governing. So we actually have some fatigue, and we've had in several town council elections, uncontested elections. The most recent one, we had 2 people run for 2 seats, 2 newcomers. So you didn't have a big pool. And part of when I was talking to people about it, they said, listen, we don't want to run again in 3 years. We'd rather a 4-year term. If you model the state assembly has an election every 2 years, for the entire state assembly, and then the Senate is every 4 years. So you have that as a really good model of just about the right time for that purpose.
Thank you, Chris. I'm gonna turn the next questions over to Commissioner Joanna Parker Lenz.
Thank you. Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you so much for being here. We are going to this section regarding nonpartisan elections. In our phase one interviews, some respondents argued that party labels give voters a useful signal about a candidate's governing philosophy, even if imperfect. In Verona's nonpartisan system, how do voters learn about candidates without that shorthand? Has the absence of party labels made it harder or easier for voters to make informed choices? In your opinion?
What a great question. And there is a very long answer to your question, so I will try to make it as succinct as possible. There's an old saying that I'm sure you have heard, that there's no Republican or Democratic way to fix a pothole. And that's the philosophy that we have in Verona. Is so much of party politics is based in ideology. And a lot of those ideologically sensitive issues that are happening are really happening on the state and the federal level. The decisions that we're making on a municipal level generally are not aligned with some greater ideological perspective. So that's the first thing I would like to throw in there as far as that. So how do voters know? I think the beauty of the nonpartisan model is that voters actually have to form a different set of criteria in order to cast their ballot. What I mean by that is it's very easy to say, okay, this person is an R, or this person is a D. I'm going to vote in that direction. I'm going to vote a line, without really knowing what is happening. Municipal government is so sensitive to very significant structural and very nuanced issues that don't really have a place anywhere else in government. That is a really kind of short-sighted approach, unfortunately. So how do voters find this out? Well, a lot of our voters that you will see really consume media. Unfortunately, with the death of local media, that's an issue. In Verona, we have a hyper-local online newspaper called myveronanj.com. And the editor interviews all the candidates with questions. And they're not advanced questions. She does a really good job. In addition, voters actually are then more likely to follow individual candidate social media publications and things like that. So what's very interesting is when I was knocking on doors, which is probably one of the most significant ways voters find out about what we're talking about, is retail politics is very much expected in Verona. And people would say, oh, I read your website, or I saw something on your social media. So people were engaging, even if they weren't necessarily following a website or a social account, they were engaging. So I think that's a big part of it. We also do voter forums, council forums that are attended in person and publicized online as well, and published. The Junior Women's Club hosts it as a nonpartisan experience as well, and that gets pushed out. We'll have sometimes smaller voter forums. So we have a large luxury apartment complex in town, the Claridges, and we didn't have it this past year, but they've had voter forums before because they have some very specific issues related to them as well. What it really does is it pushes the voter to making some decisions. And one of the things that I think occurs naturally as a result is that there is a certain amount of incumbency advantage because the incumbents have name recognition. But when you're really looking at how people are making decisions, and we're in small communities, it's often word of mouth. I know this individual. I've seen them in action. You should vote for them. It is going door to door. It is having meet and greets. These things are not pro forma in a nonpartisan election cycle. They're actually very much required and very influential on the election results. In addition, a lot of people choose to advertise. I didn't do any paid social media advertising in the election last year and was the highest vote getter. But others did a lot of paid advertisements. And then we do traditional mailers. So I sent a glossy mailer out to every house in town, and do some focused mailings on specific issues to targeted demographics, without giving up too much campaign strategy. But that certainly helps to get the message out to individuals as well. And I think that there's an assumption that if you don't have the party identification, it it ties a hand behind the voters back in some ways. But in reality, I think it actually informs the voters more because they have to go to the candidate and understand in addition to the candidate going to them. So I think that's a genuine advantage. It was a lot more evident when we had May elections because the only thing that was on the ballot was municipal matters. So you had a very hyper local election in that case. When we started hitting the November elections, one of the interesting questions that I started to get asked that I was not when I ran in May was, who are you voting for governor? So individuals were asking me that question, and my answer is I make that decision in the voting booth. I'm an unaffiliated voter. I do not subscribe to a party, and so in many ways, I won't give you my whole personal story, but there's a lot of reasons for that. But anyway, so people would say, listen, I haven't made that decision yet. I have the philosophy of I'm not making that decision until very close to the election in case something happens and I find new data that suggests that maybe the person I was thinking of does not deserve my vote at this point. So I think you had a lot of that. And also you have a lot of name recognition. We have a lot of community events and being seen in community events, sending out a mailer and with your face on it, people put a face with a name. That's actually very helpful as well.
Can I just ask a really quick follow-up question that we don't actually have here? And I know we don't have all night, and we appreciate your candor. I know some people have made comments that if we switch, one switches from partisan to nonpartisan, that you all of a sudden have to raise more funds, and the people who raise the most funds or spend their own money get elected. So the mailers are expensive, and sometimes those are covered by an R or a D. Did you find that restrictive when you were running as,
No, and I run my campaign like I run the government. And that is very, very fiscally conservatively. And that's a big part of it. So you can look at our ELEC filings, but I think I spent about $11,000 on an election, and that was it. And that included my mailers, that included lawn signs. As I said, I didn't do social media advertising, but it was a lot of mailers, events, things like that. The second place vote getter, who was, I think, 13 votes behind me, Deputy Mayor Jack McAvoy, he spent less than $6,500. He didn't even have to file an R1 in order to do that. So I actually think it ends up by causing all the elections actually cost less for everybody because you don't have that party money involved, and it brings down the cost of elections. And so that's my interpretation. But I didn't have any corporate donors. I didn't have any PAC contributions or anything like that. The first time I ran, I did have a significant PAC contribution that was well advertised because the New Jersey Education Association provided me the maximum contribution because I'm a member of it. And so that helped. But in my first election as a challenger, I think I spent, all things said and done, about $13,000. I had several $1,000s left over in my campaign coffer. So you have to, I think, if you, instead of saturating with very party-oriented publications, I think if you strategically communicate with the voters, you can do it at a lower cost and be much more effective because you are communicating on issues and not on personality. and you're communicating on issues rather than ideology. So you can write more and say a lot in a few words.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Okay, let's go on to our next question. One concern raised in our interviews was that without party infrastructure, financial support, we'll tackle that one, organizational backing, door-to-door help, running for local office becomes much harder, particularly for first-time candidates without existing political profile. What has your experience been with campaign costs and fundraising in a nonpartisan system? I know you tackled part of it. Is a competitive campaign achievable without party support? Just elaborate a little more.
Yes, I would say 100%. As I said, I've been an unaffiliated voter since I ran the first time, and had success in both elections. I think part of it is the nice thing. I think one of the issues that people find with not having a partisan system or primary is that it eliminates some of the vetting involved in an election. But I would suggest that there is more vetting when you have an independent running or you have nonpartisan elections, because you are now putting yourself out there and you have to build that support. So what it does is it puts you in a situation where you have individuals running that have some kind of base of support. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's a party, but it could be a civic organization that one's been a member of, the Lions Club, for example, a religious organization. You build people you know, and it's not like those organizations are helping you in name, but the individuals that you're meeting there, your friends that you've met in town, or the parents of children your children are friends with, the people you've coached with, you start to build a base of support. So I never had an issue finding volunteers. I also, and just, as a caveat, I've been a teacher in the school system for 14 years by the time I ran. So I had a very strong network of individuals who I got to know through that. And later on. So I never really had an issue, and had been involved in a lot of volunteer organizations. So it wasn't an issue for me. In reality, we've had one of my colleagues who is a currently sitting council member was not a member of any organization, and he's won 3 terms to the council, and that's Mayor Alex Roman, former Mayor Alex Roman. But he had won 3 elections to the council, has no children, was not really a member of civic organizations. He made a name for himself by attending town council meetings, speaking publicly, and talking about the issues, and building a coalition with other people that were really concerned about the tax increases that are happening in town. So if you're talking about barriers to entry, Mr. Roman proved that there are none, even if if you don't have some of those structures that help. But it is perfectly possible to build a campaign without them.
Thank you for elaborating. Next question is, approximately 43% of Millburn's registered voters are unaffiliated. Under a partisan system, any of them who wants to run a viable campaign must first affiliate with the party and submit to its vetting. Has Verona's nonpartisan structure broadened who runs and who wins, or do candidates with prior party ties still tend to dominate, excluding you, for example?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the answer to all of that is yes. So it's very dependent on the individual. You have candidate-centered politics here. So one of our sitting council members is the Democratic chairperson of the town. It's not, and so she has a base. The Democratic Party does not endorse candidates, but certainly you have a structure there to help, right? And you have other people that have shown up. I'm the only person who is not a Democrat, actually, on the council by voter registration, at least. But even then, sometimes your people that are involved in the party more gravitate toward one individual versus another. So in effect, you're kind of having a primary within. As far as the unaffiliated voter, I think that when you have pretty much anybody who can run, and you don't have that barrier, you widen, but because that additional vetting that's required, that support you have to build as unaffiliated, it narrows the candidate pool. So you're widening the candidate pool by eliminating the barrier of getting a nomination or having to appear on a ballot as a as a member of a party, but it also narrows because you have to work that much harder without that party structure to build structures outside of that, or use your party structures um, to be a, you know, how to say, they're not, the party is not supporting your campaign, but the individuals who would also be active in the party would support you in the campaign. So those are both up. So it doesn't eliminate the the points of political parties, which are to organize like-minded voters, because you can still access support through there, but also it allows unaffiliated voters to have that access to office.
Thank you.
Can I just ask one follow-up question that my commissioner just whispered in my ear that might be interesting to hear for the general public? Can you tell us about the party impact? You said you're the only unaffiliated and everybody else is a field of, clearly Democratic voters as is there involvement in their elections from the Democratic Party? Obviously, the Democratic chair is there, so.
The Democratic Party in Verona, by its bylaws, does not endorse candidates, nor does the Republican Party in Verona. At the same point, you have an organization of people that have similar mindsets, right? So that plays a little bit into that as well. So what happens at a party meeting? They say, "Oh, I like this person." You're having discussions, or you have some of those structures that exist, can still promote an election one way or another. But for example, we in the last election, there was one registered Republican, me as an independent, and 3 Democrats running. And one, the last time she ran, was unaffiliated. So she also got elected as an unaffiliated candidate 4 years ago, but then affiliated as Democrat in the meantime. And so you actually had some individuals that were more closely aligned with the Democratic Party say, okay, well, we like these candidates. But then you had some who are also, district representatives that said, no, we like these candidates. So it worked a little bit for everybody. So you have structures that exist there that naturally create discussion and help people to align a little bit, but it wasn't overwhelming in any way, and there's no official action. But if you're out knocking on doors for Mikey Sherrill as somebody who is, or for Jack Ciattarelli, because we had a pretty active both Democrat and Republican door knocking campaigns in town, and somebody asks you and you're out knocking on the door and you're like, okay, vote for Jack Ciattarelli, vote for Mikey Sherrill, and then somebody says, well, who are you voting for in November? Those people are free to answer, So and that certainly happened because people would tell me that happened, right? On both ends. People would call me and say, oh, this person said I should vote for you, or this person said I should vote for somebody else. Is it okay? That's their opinion. You decide what you want to do.
Thank you. Commissioner Villa?
Sure. Hi, Chris. Thanks. My name's Corey Biller. Appreciate your time. So some of our respondents have argued that without a party structure or party involvement, it leaves a vacuum that allows other interests, special interests, things like that to come in. Have you guys experienced any of that?
The simple answer is no. As far as corporate interest or something like that, what I think you do get other interests that will approach you, maybe like parents that are interested in a new field for the sport for their child, or the fire department that wants a new building or something like that. So you get issue-based interests, but I haven't seen any influence by corporate interests or PACs or anything like that.
Okay. I have a question that sort of follows up on the sort of the question we just asked before this one about sort of involvement of parties and things. Have you experienced that unofficially, because the parties aren't permitted to endorse a candidate, but have you experienced anything that's where they're unofficially it's apparent based on how they act, whether they show up to forums, whether they're showing, they're helping, go door to door, that they're kind of unofficially supporting candidates.
I think there is certainly some of that. And it was hard in this past election because you had the gubernatorial election happening. So it was very difficult to disaggregate what was happening for the gubernatorial election, what was happening for the local election. In previous elections, I think that there was certainly some of that because those individuals are politically minded and they're showing up and they're talking and having those common discussions. But in a lot of ways, so discussions were happening in smaller groups, and because they didn't specifically endorse, they were happening among those smaller groups of very engaged individuals and not necessarily in the larger population, if that makes any sense. But once again, it didn't create an environment that excluded anybody from winning.
So an interesting sort of draw on that is that we have found that in so let's take our board of ed is nonpartisan election.
Yeah.
And yet over some recent elections, their party affiliation has become exploited, become discussed, things like that. Have you found that in your nonpartisan government elections, have people tried to identify and say, oh, I know that person's a R, that person's a D, like, you shouldn't vote for that? Have people tried to?
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes, 100%. And I'll give you my perfect example. When I ran the first time, I grew up in Morris County. I had been a registered Republican for a good portion of my life because it was the only way to participate in the primary to choose the township council in Morris County, or the township committee was determined in the primary because it was 90% Republican, right? So by virtue of that, though I voted and supported the first independent candidate that ran since, FDR or something like that, and he won. But I'm not even kidding with the FDR thing. But then I, for many reasons, went as an unaffiliated voter, but I also worked for one of the largest special interests in the state of New Jersey that tends to align a lot more with democratic and liberal ideology, democratic politics and liberal ideology. So what was very interesting is I got it in both directions, which was, okay, don't vote for him because he is works for a labor union. No, vote for him because he's like us, because he works for a labor union. And so some people are like, he's people didn't know what I was. So people at the same time, people were saying, you had people in the same ideological camps saying two different reasons. Vote for me or not vote for me because of that. It was fascinating. I confused a lot of people, which is fine, because what happens is it then forces people to rely on the decisions they make. So I lost votes, gained votes by that way. Since then, in other elections, yes, I think you absolutely have seen vote for this person because they are like me. I think there may have been an assumption among some voters in town, individuals in town, that moving the elections from May to November would make them more ideological, and would ride a wave in a certain, toward the Democrats because of the gubernatorial election. And Verona tends to was reddish purple when I moved here and is now, purplish blue now. And a lot of people that kind of assumed that the elections would go in a particular way. And that wasn't the case. So I think it's interesting in that capacity, but you do get a little bit of that. And then what's very interesting is, let's say you have one person who's very Republican running and everybody knows a Republican. One person who everybody knows is a progressive Democrat running. Okay, fantastic. You want to pick three. You want to vote for three. So that's the other beauty about having the election every 2 years, is the person is either voting for two or three candidates if they choose to. But what that does is it allows a person to make a somewhat ideological voting choice, while at the same time making a somewhat practical voting choice. At the same time. So that's one of the great beauties of that system as well.
Interesting. So shifting a little bit from the election aspect of it, once you get elected, now you said your council is primarily Democrat. The county at this point is kind of Democrat. So I'm not sure whether you can necessarily answer it, but do you find governance issues could be swayed or relevant to parties? So if you have Democrats that are majority of the county getting county representation, funds, attention, things like that, is that something that could be a problem if maybe the majority aren't Democrats?
I haven't seen it. And the reality of it is, and I'll put it out there, the Essex County Central Administration, as you mentioned, is very Democrat. If I call down to the county, I'm not treated any differently because I don't have a party affiliation. And I respect the folks at the county for that, the constitutional officers, our county executive, and the individuals that work within the county. I haven't seen that. Certainly, if you're more involved in, the county Democratic Committee, you might build some relationships there. But I haven't seen that really interfere in that time at all.
What do you say to the hypothetical question? It's like, okay, sure, you're independent, but everyone knows that the rest of the council is Democrat, and so that's why they give you the time of day.
Well, it's one of those interesting questions because some of the Democrat council members who are registered Democrats tend to be a little bit more fiscally conservative or don't agree necessarily ideologically with the Democratic Party on everything, but they've always been Democrats or something along those lines. So we have a lot of diversity intellectually among the council, and that is known, that is appreciated on the county and the state level. So I've never seen that necessarily as a problem. And I haven't seen any push where individuals have been excluded or run over because they didn't fit into that certain demographic that would get more attention than another.
And as far as in your history, because you've had some history, as far as day-to-day governance between the committee members or council members, not committee members, have you seen any issues created by, even though you're nonpartisan elections, created by partisan affiliation? For example, in selecting the mayor or deputy mayor, or voting for the mayor or deputy mayor?
I think that's probably less party affiliation and more personal alignment among the council. So I'm the only non-Democrat on the council, and I've been the mayor twice. So if that kind of answers that question, so it doesn't. I think it looks at it that way, but and both of my mayoral elections were 3-2 votes, right? But that wasn't necessarily about party. It was more about you had another individual who wanted to be mayor, and you had 3 individuals that thought a different person should be mayor, and that was that. And we can kind of get into that if you want to ask questions about the mayor role. So I really didn't see that play in.
We are going to do that in the next round of questions.
Yeah.
So we can, but just to put a bow on the sort of partisanship.
But I wouldn't discount it, to be fair, if you had 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats on the council or something like that. I wouldn't discount that there would be some affiliation, but one of the important things to note is that those positions can be collaboratively determined. So in order to do the right thing for municipalities, and I can't get into, I keep those conversations confidential with my colleagues and things like that. I know certain things are discussed and there's obviously critiques about that, but the reality of it is you might have it more in that case, but I also think it provides a really good opportunity to not necessarily have to have that party loyalty determine who the mayor is when the time comes. It releases individuals from that expectation and now makes it a choice rather than an expectation, which is empowering.
All right, so just to put a bow on this partisan talk, is there any aspect that we haven't asked you about that we're missing, that partisanship, either pro or con, that you've experienced, and any trade-offs to being nonpartisan versus partisan?
It's very hard to answer the partisan question because I don't know why everybody's coming to the table when they have something. I think the reality of it is it's not as much about partisanship, it's about who has the better organizing platform. So if you want to make change and you're on the council and you want to get the public engaged, and you're, let's say, heavily involved in the regular Republican organization, the Democratic organization, you have a built-in organizational system, emails, phone, things like that, to reach voters and say, here, show up at a meeting and discuss something. Okay. So I would say that certainly has probably played a role more so than just party affiliation. It's the access to individuals because you have an affiliation rather than the affiliation itself.
Thank you. Are you finished?
Yeah, I could go on.
Let me just ask you about our Essex County executives. So in nonpartisan, for a county road, there's a pothole or something, or a tree that needs to be taken down that's on a county road. And you call up, our Essex County executive, Joe D. Is he responsive to you being nonpartisan?
So I think if we have an issue that there is, the county wants, in Essex, really wants to partner with the locality. So every county has every municipality, I'm sorry, has a county liaison. So we have direct access. Ours is a gentleman by the name of Jay Coltree, he's deputy county administrator. He comes to our council meetings, and he's our first line of defense, and he works with everybody. The nice thing, though, about our form of government is it really shouldn't be me calling the county executive to get that pothole fixed. It should be the township manager calling the director of roads and bridges to get that pothole fixed. Gotcha. And what that does is it eliminates some of that away. If we need something big, sure. But I can tell you, we're looking at building a substantially, new public safety complex that the Essex County Improvement Authority is going to do the financing for. They're not paying for it. We have to pay them back. But with their bonding power, it significantly will reduce the bond price. And that our former township manager, Mr. Diarco, went and sat with the county executive and had that conversation. I didn't necessarily need to be there. So on the county level, it's not as important. In reality, I don't think it's the party piece as much as possible. I think let's say on the state level, or on the federal level, the mayor position is actually very important toward those things. So I needed something from Cory Booker's office at one point, Senator Booker's office. And I said to the township manager, Mr. Diarco, today, can you call down to Senator Booker's office? And it was about congressionally directed spending. And he said, no, if you want to do that, why don't you call? And I said, why? Joe was like, well, because I answer the phone for the mayor, right? And I'm like, I'm just a small town mayor or whatever. I called, and I was on the phone with the district director very quickly, more quickly so probably than if a staff member had called. So I think that's less about party, but more about role, right? So I think that's a piece of it. But I think the Essex County does a good job in listening to our concerns. We don't always get everything we want, but especially on the roads and bridges side, we have Verona Park. If we have an issue with drainage or something like that, and we report it, it gets fixed. If they're putting some facility in, and we can say, hey, can you they put pickleball courts in our in the park near a residential neighborhood. I said, can you ordain these or do some posting that says you can't use them after a certain hour because pickleball is loud? And they did it. They're not really looking for that, and they're open. We are included in everything they do. I can't say nicer things about how we've been treated. In some cases, you also have to use your who you know. So maybe if I don't get as far somewhere, I might ask a colleague who has a relationship with somebody in the county to make that phone call. You can't govern with ego when you're a small town in a really big county.
Thank you. Commissioner Shanuk Tana.
Sure. Chris, nice meeting you and thanks for your time. My name is Shaunak Tanna. I'm going to focus on governing body size for a minute. So what we're trying to solicit opinion on is a 5-member body effective? Do we need 7 or 9 or 5 versus 7 is really a question for us. The pros we have heard for a larger committee is to allow for more functional subcommittees, distribute workload more effectively, raise the threshold for organizational capture. And some others have said, recruiting qualified candidates for a larger body is an issue, and having too many opinions could be an issue. With your experience with a 5-member council, what do you think of the 5 versus 7-member debate?
It's hard for me to judge the 7-member council because I don't sit on one, for sure. And at the same time, I think the first question you need to answer is, what is your system of government going to be?
Of course, yeah.
In a borough form of government, a 6 or 7-member council makes a lot of sense because you're very much a legislative body, where your mayor has that executive authority. When you're in a township committee or council manager form of government, it's really a question of how many elected officials are you going to ask your manager or administrator to manage? So one of the most important things that you need to be able to communicate is consensus of the council to the administration, right? So in our form of government, the township administration has a lot of authority. Though our township administrators, our managers, consult the council on a lot of items. They don't have to. We don't hear personnel issues and stuff like that, unless they become lawsuits or collective bargaining or something along those lines. But your manager has to effectively manage the personalities on the council in order to ensure that everybody is heard. And you can't necessarily get everybody's opinion in every decision, but adding 2 council members makes that 40% more difficult. Because now you're asking if the manager wants to straw poll council members on an item. They're calling 5 people, and now they're calling 7. And you have now 7 people who are asking your administration to craft recommendations in a certain way. Or when something comes before the council, you now have 7 people asking questions. I think that that's what you need to consider. So if you opt to go to a manager form of government or a powerful administrator form of government, my recommendation is to keep it 5. If you would opt to go to, I don't know why you would do this, but go to the borough form of government or something like that, it would make sense to have more people on the council, in my opinion.
What do you think of subcommittees in particular? Because with a 5-member body, 3 is a quorum, so you're restricted to 2 members on a subcommittee. Do you think 3 members would be better?
Correct. So it's very interesting. Our township charter specifically forbids standing committees.
Okay.
We have done special committees. So one of the things that I did when I came on the council is recommend we do special committees on some outstanding issues. And that was helpful when those committees reported back. And that worked. We got a lot of things in motion as a result. We haven't done that in a little while because we're dealing with so many big things that everybody's involved. The issue sometimes with the subcommittee is that you're still, in many ways, by its nature, having to act as committee of the whole, because that subcommittee needs to consider what the rest of the council is going to be okay with before putting out a recommendation that they know is going to be perilous or something like that. So you have to have a lot of communication. Um, it's hard for me to answer that question because I haven't seen
Right.
3 versus 2. So I won't answer the question. I can see your concern there, but also understand that the more subcommittees, the more people you have on subcommittees, you're now putting your township administration in the position where they're dealing a lot with those matters and maybe not dealing with other pressing concerns that have to happen when they're dealing with more personalities and more committees and things like that.
Got it. That's a very interesting perspective. Thank you. We touched on this a little bit, but if I had to ask you, the mayor being elected by the council, how does that process work in practice? Is it contentious, collaborative, transparent? How would you characterize it? I mean, you told us what has happened, but I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, my first mayor election was a 5-0 vote for mayor and deputy mayor. I'm not going to get into how that 5-0 vote happened because I consider those my conversations with my colleagues confidential on those ways so you can have open, honest conversation. I think that's very important. But there were discussions. I will put out that there were discussions because there were 2 people who wanted to be mayor at that point. And then, an arrangement was developed. So, that's in one of the circumstances. And then we've had 3-2. If you're in a situation where 2 people definitely want the position, you get into the point where can you develop consensus by could somebody be deputy mayor or does somebody want a seat on the planning board or on a public safety committee or something along those lines that has more influence on some day-to-day decision makings in the municipality. So you have those kind of things, and that's often of what is put out there. The process happens in front of the public as far as, you're casting a vote at that point. So I think that's out there, but it does require conversations. If you don't want the first thing to happen to a new council be to divide the council, those conversations should happen in confidential fashions. Otherwise, you're hashing out some things, and you can't really come back from that if you do it in public necessarily, and have an honest conversation. So the trick is, if you want to have an honest conversation, it needs to be done informally in that case.
Understood. Do you think the residents understand how the mayor is elected? Because we find that in the case of our township, not many people are aware that they don't directly elect the mayor, and the committee, in our case, and council in your case, elects the mayor.
Some do and some don't. People that move in don't understand as much. People who've been around for a while do. A lot of people didn't understand until we had a contested mayor vote, and there was some media coverage associated with that. And the media was very explanatory. And you actually had people show up and say, before the vote happened, you had people say, you should vote for this person for mayor. That happened. I didn't ask people to do that on my behalf. But that was the reality of it. So that actually brought some press, and there's some discussion about that. So some people understand. I do spend time explaining to voters what my role is and people who reach out. So I actually have developed, so somebody says, hey, just emails me with an issue and asks me to do something. Public Works didn't pick up my garbage. I get that question a lot, email a lot, call a lot. Okay. Understand that the township manager and the superintendent of Public Works actually administer the garbage contract. And I say in our form of government, the township manager is the chief executive and operational officer of the municipality. But I will forward this email, copy him, and follow up with him on your concern. That's how I deal with that. but I will educate people every possible time I can, and I do that a lot running. Some people don't understand. I think it's more so done now where people get it, because we don't. Eventually, people, most people understand because they're not electing, they're not voting for a mayor,
Right.
so they know that they don't choose the mayor. They may not know exactly how the mayor is chosen, um, but certainly that's a piece of it. But I tend to do a lot of education on what my role is. I refer to myself as the asker in chief, because if a resident reaches out to me, um, I'll say, listen, I got it. Let me go make a phone call on your behalf. And I can do that. But I did that as a council member. People who voted for me, they didn't shoot their sidewalk and they didn't hear back when they sent an email. Okay, forward me the email. And oftentimes that's just enough, right? To get attention to a matter. Um, or people didn't vote for me. There's like, hey, fix this. I didn't vote for you, but you got to fix this. Okay. I'll absolutely help you fix your sidewalk because I represent you, despite you not voting for me or not. It's fine. I still like you. You're a wonderful person, right?
So if you were redesigning your system, would you prefer a directly elected mayor, or would you rather have it be the way it is right now?
If you have a council manager form of government, like we do, I would strongly and vehemently advise against a directly elected mayor. And the rationale for that is you create an environment in which people think if they're electing for the mayor is the CEO, and they're not. And you are setting up the municipality for a lot of misunderstanding. If you don't have a directly elected mayor and a council manager form of government, it operates much better. I think the classic example of a town where a lot of people don't understand what the mayor does and doesn't do is Montclair. So Montclair has a nonpartisan council election. They have wards and things like that. They have a directly elected mayor, but they also have a council manager form of government. So that inherently creates a conflict.
Chris, but
yeah.
didn't you just say that people contact you as mayor to get things done? So isn't it the same?
Well, so what I educate
Meaning,
people is,
aren't they confused either way?
so most people, we do everything we can to get people to email the entire council. So we have an email form on our website that we refer everybody to that emails the entire council, the manager, the deputy manager, the town attorney, I think, and the township clerk. Everybody gets it. And our township manager will actually respond to resident inquiries from there. It takes a dedication from me to say and to remind people, listen, I am not the CEO. Let me put you in the contact with the person who did, and we can work together. But that would be the same thing that would happen if they were reaching out to me as the sole council member they contacted because they knew me or had a relationship or something like that. When being the mayor when you can really get stuff done as the mayor is with outside organizations, whether it's with, PSE&G, I had a street light shining into somebody's like living room, bedroom. And they were talking to Public Works. Public Works was calling. It took a year. Nothing was happening. I walked by with my dog one night and they saw me like, hey, can you do something about this? I called my rep at PSE&G and they had a truck there in 2 days. So there are different things that exist. And I think that's more important when you talk about that. But that is also something that the council can strategically work with the mayor to help direct, and the mayor can work with the township manager to come up with a strategy, and it really facilitates that happening. So you have to educate your voters, but at the same point, you're setting your mayor up for failure in a lot of ways when you're having a directly elected mayor and a council manager form of government, because they have the same vote as everybody else on the council, but have a much higher profile.
Mhm.
And that creates very significant challenges for that individual. I would not want to be a mayor in a directly mayor form of government if I did not have appointment authority, veto power, executive authority, things like that, because you are so put under the microscope when you don't have the actual power to back up what people are asking you to do.
All right. I'm gonna move to the appointment process for boards and commissions. We touched on that briefly. How does it work in practice? Does the full council weigh in when you're making those appointments, and how does that impact the effectiveness of boards and commissions?
Yeah, so we have an application process when a member wants to be on a committee, or when a member of the public, they submit an application and a resume. And when we have openings, we consider, or when we have reappointment time, we consider anybody out there, whether somebody should continue or not. Often, most of the time, people are, continuing their positions. Sometimes they're not, if there are other really good candidates out there. What we do in Verona, and the picking people has changed a couple times, but what we have kind of coalesced around is we will send rice notices to anybody who has put in to be on a committee. And if there's nobody else, let's say there's nobody else, then usually they're just appointed with a brief discussion among the council, usually on a side call or whatever. If you have a lot of candidates, we'll actually send rice notices and discuss them in executive session. And the reason for that is we don't want to dissuade people in the community from putting their name out there for important boards and commissions, by having some discussions over their qualifications and stuff in public. But people can certainly ask for that to happen. And we actually had that happen on a planning board seat recently, where we had multiple people put in for a planning board seat. One of the current planning board members requested it be discussed in open session. But then, it's generally a bad idea to say something that wouldn't be considered positive about any member of the public in an open session. And of course, there are legal consequences of that that could happen, and you just don't want to be embroiled in that. So that's kind of how we've worked it. But typically, there are conversations, offline among council members. Hey, this person applied. What do you think? We recently had we had a member of the public apply. He was already on a committee, applied to be on a second committee, and we have a couple members of the public who are that. But I got a call from a colleague. Hey, do you think we should do this? And we looked back, and it didn't seem to have any conflict, and there's nobody else. We really needed people for that second board, and there was conversations about that. But generally, it's not. Every once in a while, you'll have a controversy, and just certain people want one individual, and certain people want another. But typically, we're really looking for people to serve on these boards and committees, and and most of the time, we actually have a hard time filling them. So,
Have those side conversations, led to any allegations of backroom dealing or affected?
I haven't seen. Well, the only time somebody will accuse you of backroom dealing is if they don't get chosen, or if their person doesn't get chosen. Nobody's accused you for backroom dealing if they get appointed.
Right.
And that's a piece of it. I think people get it, and that's why when I became mayor, and you have some influence on the agenda and procedure and things like that, I really wanted to have the council discuss qualifications, because the way they did it before was having like a ranked choice voting procedure, which made absolutely no sense to me, because you need to discuss qualifications. That was my opinion. And then we had a conversation about not wanting to do that in public. So we would discuss the qualifications in executive session with a rice notice. And that's how we kind of addressed that. But I wanted the entire council to really openly discuss. I found that very important, and that's how the direction we're moving in. And then, we'll put out a slate of people and move a committee at a time. And sometimes we have unanimous, often I would say 95% of the time we have unanimous consent. And other times you have, you very rarely get somebody who votes no on a public appointment. You might get people who abstain, but you, it's, I think most council members don't want to be in the position where they're saying, no, I do not want you, right? Maybe I just won't vote on this one. But that's what happens.
Got it. Understood. I'll pass it back.
Thank you. Dr. Jerry Kahn, please. This is our last section, Chris, just to let you know.
Okay, great.
Mayor, thank you for joining us today. I found all of your responses to be very insightful. I did want to, before I cover the questions that I've been assigned, I did want to go back on the directly elected mayor question, just to make sure I understand. I think last time when our attorney presented to us, if you do a staggered election, the mayor is, if you do a directly elected mayor with staggered council manager, the mayor is elected with a minority of the council, and then in the midterm, it's the majority of the council. So I think is the point that you're trying to make that the mayor is sort of, if you separately directly elect the mayor, they might not have the majority on the council. And so now you're sort of setting them up to not be able to deliver what the people necessarily want, I guess.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I think that's it. And that's a big piece of that, because the primary responsibility of the mayor in a weak mayor form of government is to represent the council to the people, and to run meetings and do agenda setting and perform ceremonies. It's not that much, but yes, you could be in a situation if you elect a mayor for 4 years, and then the council changes. It could be a very difficult situation for sure.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense.
But just to note, we elect our mayor every 2 years. So anytime the council changes, we have a new mayoral election. So the council term is 4 years, the mayor's term is 2 years.
Okay, so you could end up in a situation where the people voted for a mayor, then majority of the council turns over, and now the mayor is no longer, in control necessarily of the majority of the council.
I would say, instead of using the word control, I would say the mayor doesn't sufficiently represent the opinions of a majority of the council, yes.
Okay.
And now that can force consensus building, or it can breed resentment that is not healthy for the community.
But
But
if
isn't it
it's
the same
2 years,
issue?
you are-
If you're a directly elected mayor, it's a 4-year term.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's the same issue, just for a smaller period of time.
Well, if a majority of the council turns over, you would have a mayor every 2 years, right?
But they have a mayor every 2 years, so it's not an issue
They
for
do.
them.
For that.
Right, yeah, that was the
Yeah.
point.
It's not an issue for us. I've been mayor for 4 years, but I was elected mayor twice. I haven't been mayor for 4 years. I'm in my second term. So I will serve for mayor for a little over 4 years because our terms were longer the first time around. But I was elected and chosen again as mayor this year.
All right, now to the structure for council manager. So in the council manager form of government, the manager's authority is defined by state statute rather than delegated by ordinance, which is how it's done in our current township committee. In practical terms, what does that mean for the day-to-day relationship between the council and the manager, and between the manager and department heads?
Well, primarily, I think that having it that way means that one of the most important decisions that the town council will make is choosing the right township manager. And that is a time when you have a collaborative process, and that is a time when you need to pick somebody unanimously, right? So I think that's item number one. Item number two, I think with the manager having that statutory authority allows them to run the day-to-day operations of the town independently of the council to an extent, because the council does not need to be involved with the minutia of the running of the municipality. The council needs to oversee the minutia of the running of the municipality, which is different. And I can clarify, right? Where I'm not going to go out there and tell the police how many officers they're going to have on overtime at a given time. But I am going to look at that overtime budget and make sure that we are falling within that budget, right? The manager is going to determine who gets hired for a position in the municipality. I'm going to make sure that the public is having good relationship with that individual, right? And will provide feedback to the manager. I'm not deciding how many DPW trucks are on the road, right? But once again, I'm looking at that budget, I'm looking at reports, and I'm looking at the streets. Okay, that's very important. So it allows the manager to spend a lot of their time delegating their own responsibility without having to look for the council constantly. And that is, I think, vitally important to the operation of a successful community. I have had interactions in the borough form of government where the mayor is the chief executive officer, but then the administrator is chief administrative officer, and it gets very confusing. And a lot of municipal staff I've spoken to don't know who really they're reporting to at a given time. They have issues, especially, there are a lot of issues with like police departments when you have directly elected mayors because they can appoint like police directors and stuff like that without necessarily the consent of it's very strange how that all works out. But I think generally you have a much better relationship with your manager, and your manager is more likely to stay longer the more autonomy they have. But it also requires township council members who are willing to call that township manager and have a weekly check-in, a monthly check-in, pick up the phone and say, do you have a couple minutes today? Can we go through a bunch of things? The way that I don't demand a lot of our manager. I expect a lot. You empower your managers to make the right decisions. I tell him what my expectations are, right? And I hope the rest of the council does that. But which means I also don't have to ask for a lot. So what I found is we generally have a good relationship with we've had 3 managers in my time on the council. One resigned shortly into my time on the council. We hired a manager really to fill a 3-year, we hired the most experienced manager in New Jersey to fill a 3-year gap. And we knew he was not going to stay longer than 3 years. He trained a replacement and we hired that individual as his replacement, right? But what it does is if I have to go and I really think something is important, I don't pester the manager with minutia. So if I go to the manager and say, listen, I think this is important, they know that that is important to me and are more likely to pull the rest of the council or take it under advisement and act on it. And it diminishes a lot of that resentment that might exist from micromanaging. The last thing on earth a council member should do in a council manager form of government is to have an office in the municipal building. That is the township manager. You can have a space to meet, a conference room or whatever if you need to meet with constituents, but you should not have that physical presence on a daily basis because that creates some confusion as far as how governance actually operates on an executive basis.
Great. The council can still remove the manager by majority vote, which creates implicit leverage even if individual council members have no legal authority to direct day-to-day operation. In practice, has that dynamic ever created pressure, and how has that been navigated if so?
I haven't. I don't know if I think there's an inherent pressure on the manager that they need to balance all the different personalities. Our managers typically work on 3-year contracts, so we can remove the manager. We would have to pay them to the termination of their contract. So that relieves a little bit of that day-to-day threat that they know that it's going to cost the township a lot of money in that case. But I think as you approach that time, if you have people in, it's going to be purely dependent on who is on the township council and who the manager is. You can have very different experiences. I think if you have a manager that manages the town but also can work and manage the needs of the council, you're going to be most successful in that way. But I haven't really seen. I haven't seen our council act in a way if you said, okay, listen, if you don't do this, we're going to terminate your contract. I haven't seen that. And if it gets to that point, you have a bigger problem with the manager, you have a bigger problem with the council.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Great. Looking back on your time as on the council and as mayor, can you point to specific decisions or outcomes that you believe were made better or would have been made worse by Verona's nonpartisan council manager structure?
Well, I mean that's a very interesting question. The better or worse decisions. I'll give you a generality. I think that the council manager form of government allows for the inclusion of a lot more expert opinion in decision making, right? Because the manager is going to rely on experts in the field rather than ideological ideological swayers, right? So we've had to make significant decisions about should we rebuild our water infrastructure or try to only buy water from outside of town when the state changed their PFAS requirements. There were certainly ideological pressures there related to money and potentially moving to one of these larger conglomerates or something like that. But what the council manager form of government did was allow the manager to line up experts as far as lawyers and engineers to provide us an expert opinion in that fashion. I think that definitely helped. It engenders the ability where we can put all of our questions to the manager, and the manager's responsibility is to get those questions answered, right? Versus having 5 or 7 or 9 or however many people it's going to be having direct contact with different department heads and you not being able to have that approach. So we've made some significant changes in our utilities, even our community pool, where our community pool's funding was in the red. We had to make some very significant changes to membership structure that had a lot of concern among the community in doing that, but we had expert opinion. The manager was able to put together the administration in order to answer those questions. And then we were able to be the representatives of the public to say, listen, this is what we're hearing from the public. Can we make it work? I and one of my colleagues made a very public list of recommendations, right? And when we did that, the manager's like, okay, this makes sense, this makes sense, this makes sense. This is one thing we may not be able to do this year, et cetera, right? And it really provides for that to happen. And it allows every council member to have their voice heard. Because the council members are not just relying on people who could be their allies or their opponents to listen to them. They are relying on the manager listening, gathering data, and responding to all concerns. So it actually helps to bypass maybe some debate on an issue because we're focused more on getting answers. That's where that system is very strong when you're making pretty significant financial concerns. Where it is hard is when your manager develops a budget and that budget includes a projected tax levy, and you are then faced, instead of building the budget as a mayor might in a strong mayor form of government, or a council might in certain forms of government when they have the budget creating authority, or somebody might be the commissioner of the finance department or something like that, where the manager has met with department heads, already said no to a lot of things, and is now, or yes to some things, is now putting this to the legislature, in this case, the council, for approval, and we have to further say no, or ask the tough questions. And that's when things get difficult, where we are now in a position where, though we don't directly supervise department heads, we are significantly impacting their operations through making changes in the budget, potentially line item changes in the budget.
All right, our last 2 questions. If you were advising a community like us that currently operates under a township committee, what would you tell them about evaluating whether a structural change makes sense?
I think you have to determine why you're making the change, right? I haven't obviously read your materials for a reason, because I didn't read anything on your website because I didn't want to be swayed or think I had to answer in a certain way. Um, and that was by design. So you really have to decide why you're doing this, right? Are you doing it because the public wants something? Are you doing it because you want the government to run more efficiently? Are you doing it because what is happening right now is not working? Um, the question I would always put forward is what form of government is going to do the best for the most people? And every time I come back to it, it is my opinion that the council manager form of government in municipalities the size of Verona and Milburn is the best way to do it. If you get into a Patterson, when you have a lot of members of the council and a lot of issues there, I think a strong mayor form of government is the most appropriate in that circumstance because you need that political leader in that circumstance. But in our municipalities, doing the best for the most people, in my opinion, would be done by a council manager form of government.
Great. And is there anything about Verona's experience that we haven't touched upon and that you think our commission should be thinking about that we haven't asked?
I don't think so. I think my only piece of advice maybe to consider is, and I know you're all doing this, you're an independently elected commission. Back in 1986, when Verona went from, had our charter commission, you had 8 people run for 5 spots. One must be very careful to not think about how individuals of the past would fit into the future government, right? You have to think about, ideally, what do I want my government to be, and how can I get individuals, whether they serve on your township committee now or want to serve, how they would need to fulfill the norms that we're establishing through this change in government. The other piece of this that I think is incredibly important is your education plan. How are you going out to the public? And obviously you have documents, proceedings, and things like that. How are you going out to the public and explaining that? Because one of the things that I said that I do now is educate the public a lot on what our municipal government is like and how it operates. And how can you have a commitment from your township administration, from your future elected leaders, to continue that education so that people, if they make a decision, they accept your recommendations to change the form of government, how they can feel ongoing satisfaction with that form of government. So yes, we need to make the change, but we also need to ensure that our residents, our voters, continue to be served and satisfied by the government. And I think that's something that Verona does well, is able to consider the individual and reach the individual. And I hope that the same would happen in Milburn for sure.
Thank you.
There's actually one more question, sorry. I had not a follow-up to that necessarily, but something that I remember having read when researching Verona. I think there's something in your ordinance where if a mayor isn't selected after some amount of time, that it goes to the highest vote getter. Is that correct? And can you talk a bit about
Yes,
that?
it's something like after 5 or 7 ballots, if no mayor is chosen, it goes to the highest vote getter in the last election. I think that is that's statutory. So it's an ordinance, but I think that there's some basis in statute on that from the Faulkner Act. But I can't tell you for sure. We have never had to use that. But what's very interesting is some people read that in the code and read it as, oh, the highest vote getter always is the mayor. Or every couple of years when people are like, okay, got to choose the mayor, the whole system shifts. Some people will be like, oh no, it's the highest vote getter always gets it. And some people it's like, oh no, it's this person who's deputy mayor the last time. Or some people will say, it's the person who's been the longest on the council and hasn't been the mayor or whatever. Typically, people interpret that based on who they want the mayor to be. And that kind of gets out there. So when you do rethink the ordinances, I would look at the Faulkner Act. I'm not sure that is the the best way of doing it. And the reason being is that now prohibits, either in our system of government, 2 or 3 people from being eligible to be mayor at that point, right? So if you didn't run in the last election, you couldn't possibly be mayor, which I find very strange. So I don't like how that's worded, even though I was the highest vote getter in the last election. So if I wasn't elected, if we didn't have a majority, I would have become mayor anyway. But I think that's perilous because you could have a brand new person be selected as mayor, and generally, in my opinion, you should serve at least a couple of years to see how the council runs, to get an understanding of the role of council member before you serve in the mayor capacity. So it's not alienate your peers and the manager and stuff like that. But that's how it's done. But I would research that. I've never had to worry about it necessarily because it hasn't been an issue. We've always, in my time, had a mayor on the first ballot, as far back as I can remember. And we've had a bunch of different mayors here and there since my time in Verona.
Can I ask a foundational question?
Yes.
Chris, it sounds like from your answers and the context that you have a particularly engaged resident population. Is that correct?
I would say, I would say yes, probably above the average engagement. And for a couple reasons, our population's a little smaller, so one voice, carries a little bit. We have about 15,000 people. So that's a part of it. But we have a very engaged school system. So at one point, I was on the strategic planning committee for the school district, and our mission statement was the Verona Public School is the center of an engaged community. That was what our mission statement was, because our schools are a very important part of our community, and that is one big part of why our residents are so engaged, because you have a lot of access to the Board of Ed. You have a lot of access to school administration. We have elementary schools with 150 kids in them. One elementary school is one around the corner from my house, but we have some bigger ones. But there's a lot of that expectation of service that exists within the school system that I think carries on to municipal government. We also have things like the township pool that ties people to government a lot, and it is one of the most significant drivers of public participation. Our rec programs are also not only for children, but also adults are very popular and often fill up. And that has gotten people engaged. And we've had some issues with the water and have had to raise water rates because of this PFAS stuff. So we've had a lot of things that have happened that have affected particular voters that wouldn't normally, like some voters wouldn't be as engaged. But we've hit on a lot of different things as a result, pilot funding, okay, affordable housing and where that's being developed. So we've had so many issues in town that have attracted different groups that we have been much more engaged, I think, than most places, because we're doing this all at once. Normally you get a little time, you get a little breathing room. In Verona, we are just, it's just one thing after another, and how we're being hit. And some of that was from the can being kicked down the road for many years prior, but also those councils before me did a lot as well. But there's some issues. We had a report in the 1970s that said we need a new police station, and it's 2026.
Right.
So, eventually when, we hired a police officer that was taller than the roof in the locker room, that was a significant problem, right? But, that's one of those things. So I think that's a little bit of why. I also credit some of my council colleagues, one in particular, who has really gone out and mobilized a lot of, developed a very large social media presence, puts up, summaries of council meetings. I don't always agree with her take on the council meetings. But it gets voters to the point where they start asking questions. Or, they'll say, well, I disagree with you. And I'll be like, actually, no, you don't. Like, you don't actually disagree with me. I agree with you, but you may have read it somewhere, not necessarily the right place or whatever. So that's another big piece
Minutes
of
would
it,
be a good way to look at that.
you know. So, that's
Yes.
that's a piece of it. That would probably be the explanation. And we have a lot of people moving in from Manhattan and Philly and stuff like that who told me they love this local politics. When I knocked on doors and people opened the door and they said, we've never had anybody knock on our door before, let alone the sitting mayor of the town. And I said, well, I'm trying to knock on every door, right? And they're like, that's something you do? I said, yes, of course. Like, tell me what you're thinking about, right? Um, Now what's very interesting is because candidates for the last number of years have been doing that, it's not optional. It's an expectation to hit every street, right? Ideally every house, if you can. And that really, when you're in a voter's living room, that's, engages them for sure. You're on their doorstep, talking about issues. That is very engaging. And you can't do it you know, in in Newark or Montclair because you just have so many houses, right? You can't hit probably every street, but and it's not necessarily volunteers knocking on doors. It is the candidate, and that has significantly increased engagement, but at the same time has increased satisfaction with the government because it's providing government a face and people are articulating their satisfaction generally with the progress of the town. So it's very interesting. Those would be my completely non-scientific explanations with no data to support them. Explanations for that.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor. It was quite informative. We really appreciate you doing this. Little question. Would you be willing to take some questions from the public?
Certainly.
Okay. Does anyone have anything here? Anyone
Anyone on Zoom?
Anyone on Zoom?
I don't think.
No. Great. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, and good luck to you. I look forward to reading your report and recommendations.
It's going to be a long one.
I love long reports, so I look forward to it. All right, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you,
We're
Chris.
dismissed.
Okay. Very nice. Next item, old business, Commissioner Parker Lynch, community outreach.
We're continuing the community outreach, built on that list. I send to work moms, newcomers. I know that everyone here is sharing with their networks. I think, we're encouraging people who are.
Chris, how are we doing on South Mountain Civic Association? 'Cause I feel
Civic
like that's like a
Association,
good
yeah,
topic.
have you made any headway with Civic Association?
No.
I think we're doing our best to get out there. I think to the mayor's point is, to try to get community engagement. We're certainly not going in the middle of the winter, go knock on people's doors, but we'll have to figure out how to engage more people when the report is more, well-rounded. I think when it has more legs. I don't feel like at this point, or the people that I talk to, they're like, oh, I don't want to watch your thing. I trust you. I elected you for a reason. I'm like, okay, you don't want any progress? Not now. Like, oh, fair enough. So it's just kind of interesting interactions. The people that want to know, they're watching, they're looking, there are a few people that come here and log in. But I think it's gonna be hard to get that engagement until we have something to recommend. And I think once we have something to recommend, perhaps that's when the majority of the engagement will come in, pro or against what we're saying.
Well, maybe the survey will help in getting some.
Yeah, hopefully, and the town hopefully can put it in the news, in like whatever it gets pushed out, maybe on the weekly calls.
The weekly calls, yeah.
Are we live with that?
The weekly calls, we are.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the survey, yeah,
Well,
the
it's not-
survey is live.
We can't call it a survey, actually, it's
Maybe
just a
not.
list of questions, I keep missing it's a survey, but yes, that is live. I sent it out to all work moms and newcomers, I keep adding to those links. And we will add the interview to Mr. Pfeiffer to my weekly email. And anyone who missed last week's session, I highly encourage go and watch it because it's a lot of great information about the forms of government. So
Okay.
I like it.
Thank you. All right, public comment. To speak during the public comment period, please follow these instructions. Ensure your Zoom display name shows your first and last name. Click the raise hand button. You will be called upon in order and promoted to a panelist. Please turn on your video when called to speak. Clearly state your full name and whether you're a Milburn resident or a business owner to facilitate an orderly meeting and permit all to be heard. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. A reminder that the public comment period is an opportunity for residents to share their views with the commission. Commissioners will not respond to questions or engage in dialogue during your speaking time, but will carefully consider all comments. At the end of the public comment period, questions and discussion may be addressed at the chair's discretion. Anybody?
Anybody on Zoom wishing to speak, may raise your hand. No one wishes to be heard.
Great. I now close the public comment period. Are there any comments from the commission regarding any comments made by the public, since there wasn't any? How about this one?
I move to close.
I wanted to say that.
We need a second and.
All right, let's close the meeting. Everyone in favor?
Bye.
Thank you, folks, for coming. Really appreciate it.